We often have only one perspective in life, and that is our perspective. That one perspective may miss something important which can potentially propel your success. When I was watching Dr. Ian Thompson's presentation to the American Association of Clinical Urologists after hours webinar a few days ago, I saw one slide, which was the last slide in his deck, which I thought contained a lot of great information that is contrary to the seemingly strong trend towards private equity. Although there's no one way to live your life, there is an easier way and a harder way to live your life. Today, Dr. Thompson will share his insights regarding private equity and the urology practice. I have a feeling that we will dive into personal finances as well. Now, Dr. Thompson has served as a hospital chief medical officer for many years. He's a private practice urologist. He's also a legacy with his dad being a urologist. Lastly, he founded Urology Locums to help place urologists in temporary jobs to help out hospitals and sometimes private equity practices. I can't be more excited and grateful that Dr. Thompson has agreed to join us on a program today. And as usual, if you have any comments, questions, suggestions, please feel free to leave them below. In addition, later on, I'm going to give you a phone number which will allow you to call in if you want to join us via voice. Welcome, Dr. Thompson.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
All right. So you were a guest at the recent AACU After Hours webinar. And we had Dr. Andy talking about private equity and how good that was for him. And you were talking about more of a private practice model. And you presented, well, here are some things that you need to watch out for when looking at private equity. So can you give us a little bit of a background of 30-second overview of private equity from your perspective?
So that's the 30-second overview is essentially private equity is a mechanism that can help, and it's not just relegated to medicine. It's used in many sectors of business to help come in and fuel growth, bring out outside capital to help grow. And there are many good times to utilize that outside capital when you can be deployed in a good way. The downside of it is that you have to give up a piece of whatever business you're in, whether it's your urology practice, some software company. And when you do that, a lot of times you give up at least some element of control. No matter how they say the control is put in place. But the one thing is that you're also giving up a piece to people that have defined goals for the return on their income. When you own your own business, you can suffer through times where you don't necessarily need the income from it. You can allow that investment to grow and reinvest it, and you're not having to kick out, like a dividend in a company for example, like in a publicly traded company, where they have to give these dividends to keep people wanting to own their stocks. But that dividend may not be the right thing at that time. They might be better placed for the long-term health of that business to reinvest in R&D, whatever it may be. And so the question is your viewpoint, the time view on the capital, and what's that return in a short period or longer term. Many of us in medicine, we play the long game. I mean, we spend 12, 15 years in education. It's leveraged. We just call it student loans versus, private equity, but it's leveraged to improve our income in the future and allow us to do a job in providing care to our patients. But we have that long, that's something that we're investing to work till we're 60, 65, 70, maybe younger, what have you, and be able to, over that period of time, reap those returns. The difference, the time purview of private equity is usually 3 to 5, maybe 7 years at most. And it's a flip. And to use a real estate analogy, it's a flip. It's to come in, hopefully add value, improve bottom line, and flip it to the next buyer at some point down the road.
Yeah, I agree. So initially, when a private equity company comes in, they will, quote unquote, invest in your practice or sort of buy your practice, if you will. And for a lot of the senior urologists, they will get a payout of a certain amount based on some valuation of that practice. And for that payout, initially, they will take a haircut or a scrape, meaning they will get paid less to help with the valuation, if you will. And over time, it is the hope of the practice owners that by doing so, they will make up the initial scrape or the pay cut in the long run. And also, these owners now, these physicians, urologists, will have a stake in the MSO, the new entity that is formed, so that the goal, as you said, is to sell this entity. The goal of private equity is to sell this practice or this package, if you will, to the next highest bidder. And then at that, what's called second bite of the apple, at that sale, then the equity owners of the MSO of the organization, including these physicians, will be paid out. And this can continue on depending on how many times that the physician stays in the private equity situation and also how many times it gets sold. Am I correct, or is that?
Yeah, no, you're correct. No, you're exactly correct. And that income via the scrape, to a certain extent, I think is a phantom income, if you want to call it that, in that you and I in our practices, the whatever's left at the end of the month is what we get paid in some form or fashion. And people can get paid in different ways. You give yourself a portion as a salary. By IRS, you have to give yourself what's the quote unquote reasonable salary. And then if you own your own solo practice, it's easier. You just give the rest as distributions. But that increased net that net income is from this, or the scrape, or that EBITDA. They'll say, we'll create EBITDA. And by doing so, they're just reducing the income of the physicians, whether it's a solo practice or if it's a 4 or 6 urologist group. The same thing, exists. They probably get their salary, and then if they make above and beyond that salary, that gets distributed as, to them at, quarterly or annually. Think of it as a stock dividend. But when you do this, when you have to decrease what you're going to be, and usually it's 25% or something is what I hear, that scrape, and that becomes your EBITDA, and then you're hoping to get a great multiple. And what we talked about during that webinar after hours for the ACU was that the multiples are changing these days, and it's not just in urology or medicine. It's because the cost of capital is different, and that's why you're seeing house prices come down. That's why you're seeing cap rates, and cap rates for those not in real estate, that's a way that you sort of measure across asset classes your return on investment. And that's net operating income divided by a purchase price. So you saw cap rates in real estate really come down low, which meant a lower return because money was so cheap. And now that money is a lot more expensive. Just a year and a half later, that those cap rates are rising. So the same thing is being seen, I think, in private equity, that you're not seeing the second bites that you previously would have anticipated because the multiples are not attractive at the current interest rates. And I don't know, a lot of people think that those rates are going to come down pretty soon, but I don't think it's going to come down as soon as people are hoping. So that means that investment's going to be, if you're reinvested into your group, so to speak, when that senior partner gets, or the partners that do the private equity transaction, they will get a check for that multiple of whatever that EBITDA is based on their percentage holding. But they're going to be forced or required to reinvest a portion of that money that they got back into the MSO so that they can hold in the future, hopefully the second bite down the road.
It seems complex, but it's not really. These companies come in, they will ask everyone to take a haircut or a scrape, the urologist, and then they base their valuation on a certain multiple of the EBITDA. And that multiple, like you said, Ian, is decreasing. So for instance, if I were to buy your practice, if I'm a PE company wanting to come in to buy your practice, I would say, okay, well, I value your EBITDA at $1 million, and I'm willing to pay 5 times that multiple, meaning you're going to get a $5 million payout if you're the group. And what happens is it is more expensive for me to have to borrow that money, that $5 million to pay you than in the past because of rising interest rates. So number one, the multiple, that 5x, is kind of artificial. And that number is decreasing for private practices that are being acquired because of the cost to borrow that money to pay you, the practice. So that multiple is decreasing as we are currently watching the economic climate. And that number changes and is also negotiable. Am I wrong in what I'm saying here?
No, you're exactly right. And I'll put if there's a ability to put links in the bottom. I'm reading a fascinating book right now called The Price of Time. I think it's the title of it. It's a little dense, but I find it fascinating. It's a historical economic view of interest rates throughout, the past couple thousand years, and but more recently, in probably the 500, last 500 years. So, and how that has affected, and a lot of the thought around interest rates and what should that interest rate be, and in the arguments, the philosophical arguments against for and against low versus high rates, and who that benefits from an economic standpoint. So high interest rates really devalue land. So in where I'm reading right now is the time of landed aristocracy and so forth. And in times when interest rates are really high, that land is of less value, and vice versa. The opposite also occurs when the interest rates were lowered in various countries. So more, I'll glean more from that as I finish that book, but it's exactly right. And so interest is powerful, and your understanding of that and being able to arbitrage it is where a lot of wealth is made in many businesses.
Yeah, and speaking of time and how you look at life in general, I just finished reading a book. This book is actually in electronic format, and it's for free. And it's called The Almanac of Naval Navigant. The Almanac of Naval Navigant. And I'll put your book and also this book in the video description or in the comments so that you can look it up. But it gives you a different perspective on life and how you spend time and where you put your priorities, if you will. So it's always good to learn from others who have gone before us. Okay, let's see. Now we've gotten the basis of private equity in a very superficial way. We've gotten private equity discussion and urology practice kind of like we settled that. And I think based on your last slide, I think your presumption, or what you didn't quite finish saying, is that there are alternatives to joining a private equity situation or giving up control or selling to private equity. Is that right?
Sure. Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I think that.
Go ahead.
Sorry to speak. Because I think economic goals are a lot of times the driver for those, engagements with PE, which we were alluded to. I mean, there's a lot to dig into there as well. The forces at play that lead people to consider that, or to consider all various types of and it's not just private equity. It's, I'm going to go become an employee of the hospital system. You see that just as much, if not more, as a reaction to the pressures. And I think that it'd be remiss to not acknowledge those, from declining reimbursements, increased costs of doing our business. I do think, correct me if I'm wrong, we are the only business out there in the United States where we are taking less and less year over year on average for what we do, and our cost of doing business goes up, just dealing with inflationary pressures, cost pressures, all that stuff. And really encouraging folks as a whole from an advocacy standpoint to really start asking, when is enough, and giving voice to that. So as a member of the AACU, I'm also head of the membership committee for that. And I really encourage all those, to donate to or become involved with the AACU or the AUA health policy, EuroPAC, and get this message out to our leaders locally in our states and federal, legislators as well, that if they don't fix some of this stuff, the private equity hospital employment is just a symptom of the underlying disease, and that's what we're discussing here is, the cost pressures. And so what I see a lot, and we'll talk about this later, is people looking for alternatives. And one alternative is private equity or the employment. Some people just leaving medicine altogether, which is really sad. And so we have to think about our healthcare system as a whole, the delivery model, who's going to take care of us when we get older.
Yeah, as we all know, there's a shortage of urologists, and that shortage is only going to get worse. And if you have people exiting healthcare in general, including urology, that's going to be a big problem. Just on BPH alone, benign prostatic hyperplasia, we got 40 million Americans with this problem every single year that needs treatment. There aren't enough urologists. And when Medicare payment, when you look at the conversion factor, is essentially straight for decades. And then the cost, including inflation, is going up. It's not a sustainable model, right? So that is why a lot of people are exiting. It sounds like that's what you're saying.
Yeah, and you see, and I have these conversations with hospitals, practices that are looking for urology manpower help. So for instance, one conversation I had with a health system earlier this week is they've stopped booking vasectomy consultations because all their vasectomy slots are booked out through the end of the year, through December. So that's just one example. And booking out ureteral stones 6-8 weeks. I didn't dig into that. Hopefully, in retrospect, that was a stented stone. But obviously, but these are the kind of ramifications. I don't know how many people have seen ureteral stones treated with dialysis. I have more times than I'd want to, that are simply cured with a stent. But that happens in the United States of America, and in pockets where there's not urology. And I think you'll see more of that if we don't solve some of these issues. And so
as part of urology locums, it sounds like you talk to not just health systems, but also hospitals, but also private equity, right? Because everybody's looking for urologists. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so we're a little bit different than most of the other locums companies, I feel, in that run it. So I have a lot of insight into how to build a practice or a service line from scratch, but also have been in the hospital C-suite, so understand that angle of things. But the no segment of the urology market that I see is immune from the shortfall of urologists that we have. And private equity is no more immune than hospitals. And it's a hard sell from a value proposition standpoint, I feel. This is just my opinion. And to younger urologists coming out, they start to have more of these questions. I mean, the business model of many of these practices is dependent upon high volume, high throughput. One of the things that you add EBITDA or add revenue to a lot of practices is through ancillary revenues, whether it be radiation, imaging, in-office dispensary, DME. There are various ways to do that. But to make that make sense, you have to have volume throughput. This is just my read on things. So I'm open to discussions on any of this. And so you have to keep the volume up, you have to have folks seeing the patients and doing that and generating that revenue. Otherwise, if you have the volume of physicians or, PAs and Ps decreasing to the point that you're not having enough patients utilizing those ancillary resources, then those just become an overhead albatross and expense to the bottom line. And I've seen that happen in some practices to where, for whatever reason, some doctors have started leaving, and it gets to a point to the whole, what used to be a large practice with a lot of what would be seen as great assets, really with just liabilities, and the practice may not have an ongoing concern in the future. So
I agree with you. I think you also mentioned in your AACU presentation that you can have administrative bloat whenever you have these larger entities, or you get sucked into these larger entities or included in these larger entities under a platform practice. And the urology workforce shortage is definitely a problem. And like you said, I agree with you as far as the volume game, right? Keep in mind, the ultimate goal of private equity is to sell. And that second bite or third bite of the apple is how people make money. And they're thinking about doing that in 3 to 5 years. So that means after purchasing and acquiring your practice, they are going to ramp up your production, if we will, through, like Dr. Thompson said, like you said, increase throughput through ancillary such as in-office dispensing. It could be radiation, it could be infusion centers, etc., surgery centers, things like that. So they are going to look for ways to increase that top line. And like you mentioned in the presentation at the AACU after hours presentation, you have to watch the cost, right? You want to increase the top line, that's great, but then the cost is something to keep track of as well, because you can't the ultimate thing is the bottom line, right? You can't just look at the top line. You got to look at the cost just so that you can calculate what it's going to net out, so that at the second, if there's a second bite of the apple, you actually are going to be generating revenue for yourself and also as part of the private equity situation.
Yeah, you're right. And I don't think, to go back to one of your previous questions about private equity engagement with us, we haven't actually placed folks. We've just only had conversations with some private equity practices. It's harder to place locums in actual practices because the numbers don't make sense for the practices, or they don't usually, because they see the cost of their own urologists or what they perceived cost is. And the hospitals make more revenue off of our activity than any practice. And so I think you have almost two camps. It's whether or not you're going to be aligned with, I shouldn't say, but on a larger scale, the differential in payment that exists currently if you do a surgery in an ASC versus a hospital. So if
the hospital gets paid more.
Yeah, usually about twice as much.
Yes.
If you look from a Medicare standpoint. So as a result, they have more in their pocket to make from that. They also get, additional sources of revenue related to trauma, other things. And so they can pay more. And so that's really where a bulk of our urologists
essentially
goes.
The hospital can pay more because they are reimbursed more by especially Medicare, so that they can afford to pay more to have locums in their businesses, if you will, in their hospital systems.
Yeah. So if a urologist that's working with us or with another locums company is looking to go help a practice versus a hospital, their return on time is always going to be better to go work in a hospital-based system. And so that's a competitive, I think, weakness for practices and just in general, whether or not they're owned by, the docs or private equity, whoever owns them.
Sounds good. Hey, I'm going to put up the slide, your last slide regarding private equity. I think it would be a good time to talk about that right now. In the slide, just, I don't know if you recall, what if instead of private equity, and instead of the private equity giving you the scrape, meaning paying you about 25% less so that you can join the private equity, you said, give yourself a scrape. What do you mean by that?
Means that you just save more. And I just had to disclaimer, I'm not a tax advisor, financial advisor, or anything like that. You should always seek people with actual certifications. So take it for what it's worth. But
some of these actual life lessons is actually the most valuable, even though we are so hesitant to share because we're not tax professionals. Having that experience, having gone through that, is, I think, valuable to a lot of people. Go ahead, Ian.
Yeah. No, so I think the biggest thing is, and I think it's for all physicians, because I spend a lot of time talking to physicians that are mostly urologists that are looking to change something about their life, and it's usually around work. but they're looking to change their work situation. But usually there's a lot more underneath the surface, whether it's family stress, financial stress, what have you. And a lot of the things that gives me the most, I don't want to say sadness, but disappointing, is that a lot of physicians live outside or beyond their means, and so should be saving more. And I understand the pressure. Think of how long we go without having. And so you get, or having, right? It's all relative, first world problems, but you get to when you're in your mid 30s to when you can actually start earning an income and you have some discretionary income to deploy. And you owe it to the people that have sacrificed along with you, your spouse, your kids and you go get the stuff that costs more money. But if you can live smaller for longer, as far as your expenses are concerned, that's almost like an internal scrape. And you allocate more of your discretionary income to investing, especially early on. And it goes back to that whole concept of time and interest and the compounding interest. And then you're able to grow more, so that when you get to a point where it means that you're in a financial position to practice medicine on your own terms. And I think that's what leads to a lot of the burnout that we're seeing these days, is that most physicians don't have the financial wherewithal to be able to say, hey, I'm going to practice in this way or that way that, is good for me, that's going to allow me to practice in a sustainable way till when I'm 60 or 65 or 70. And then you have people thinking about, I'm just going to get out and go work for an insurance company or doing something different, which is, I think, a real loss for our profession. So
I completely agree with you. I would even say that it's not just urologists. I think most Americans, I do a lot of vasectomies, and a lot of these guys work a lot of these patients, vasectomy patients, work in the financial sector at big institutions, Schwab, Chase, Wells, or they have private practice, money management, financial management people. And I always address this with them. How do we get better education to the masses regarding finances? The simple concept of compound interest. Most people don't have any idea what that means. And once you understand that principle, then you can say, okay, well, how do I do that? Then you start looking at things such as correlated things, like things in the stock market or index funds and things like that. And if there's one thing I can encourage everyone to do, is to read books on finances. It just takes about 3 books or 5 books. Then you have a very good understanding of finances. What is difficult, Ian, that you mentioned first is you give yourself a scrape to delay gratification even more, that even longer after residency. I think we've held our breaths for so long, deferring gratification, and now we get out, we get a little bit of revenue, get a little income. It's so easy to get into that lifestyle creep, meaning you start buying your McMansion, you start buying that fancy car, when I think the better way of doing things, and again, you and I think we sing from the same music sheet, in that I think once you get out, continue to live like a resident. Continue to live like a resident, meaning living below your means. And I think what you said was giving yourself a scrape simply means you putting that money aside instead of spending it, you putting that money aside and then deploying it. So investing, that's the key. Investing that money yourself instead of paying somebody else, paying private equity.
Exactly. And the other thing to start thinking about is, Warren Buffett says, if you don't learn how to make money while you sleep, you'll be working for the rest of your life. And there are a lot of little adages like that. Great little book. I think it's called The Richest Man of Babylon. If you've not read that, I should link that. It's a real quick, easy read. All of these are just concepts to say, how can you make your money work for you? And is your money being lazy right now? Is it out there working hard for you? And so, and that just takes us just a modicum of investment, as you say, in your knowledge. All of us have demonstrated the ability to take on hard things. Otherwise, we wouldn't be urologists. We have the ability to work hard and grind and unfortunately, what I see is too many doctors saying, "Oh, I don't want to think about finance. I don't want to invest in that education." Well, then you'll be on the menu in some form or fashion if you don't do that. And so really, that's like you said, you just have to invest in that education. And you go back to the delayed gratification thing. I think they call it the marshmallow test. This is a psychological study on kids on delayed gratification. I should link that study in the notes as well. How many wouldn't wait an extra 30 minutes to get 2 marshmallows instead of 1 marshmallow or something like that? It's so simple, but it's exactly what we deal with in America at all levels within the economy.
Well, with the advances in technology and then the instant gratification and also the adage of YOLO, you only live once, right? You kind of have people, both camps, delayed gratification versus YOLO, the YOLO lifestyle. It's a balance, and you have to do, and that's why we can't really say this is what you should do. Instead, you should look at all aspects, look at our perspective, look at someone else's perspective, look at your perspective, and then come up with what works best for yourself. But I think it's important to understand a multitude of different ways to look at the same situation and do what works best for you. So let me get back to the slide again. So the second point, you said 500,000 salary, take 200,000 a year, apply to real estate or other asset class. A bank will be happy to loan you 80% LTV on income producing property. I think there's a lot of information there. Go ahead.
So my asset class of choice for my investment is real estate. And so for a multitude of reasons, I always come back to reevaluate that to say, am I doing the right thing? And I think I am, but I'm always open to other ideas. So personally, I don't, besides a Roth IRA, and I don't really invest much at all in the stock market. I mean, I have whatever I had when I was in academics and residency that, the required contributions and so forth. But aside from that, for the most part, I'm not in crypto. But the tax advantages and so forth for real estate, the ability to create just passive income. And there's no real thing, I think, of real true passive income. There's always some work that's required. In real estate, you'll see a lot of people advertising, oh, it's completely passive and so forth. There are some, it's not, I do more active real estate investing, and because that's where the biggest returns are. You can invest in syndications and stuff, and that's fairly passive as a limited partner. You send off your money and they will send you a like what's called a preferred return on your money. And then if there's an exit or liquidation, then they'll send you, that. And you can take advantage of some of the depreciation that comes along with that deal. But I choose, the question is who do you trust with your money? No matter what you're investing in, whether it's private equity, do you trust the folks to do a better job than you are? Well, if you're not willing to invest in your own education, then maybe you should, but maybe you're better off. We're all smart folks. You take that and your energy and the fact that you care more about your money than anybody else is. Just remember that your financial advisor, all these other people, this is just my opinion, they don't care about your money as much as you do, because it's your kids, your grandkids, your future that relies on your ability to steward your resources to the best of your ability. And so for real estate, for me, I got into it, looking into it back in college. My roommate in college gave me this book. His dad had given him this book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. And then he gave it to me, and it just kind of opened up my eyes. This was in about 2000 or so, shortly after it came out. So I started looking at stuff, but I was, didn't have any money, and did my first, and then I took off a year before going to medical school and to do various things, studied abroad. But when I came back, long story short, I found a local real estate investor and went and apprenticed myself to him and just did whatever he had me do, sending me, collecting rent, fixing stuff I had no idea how to go fix in rental properties, overseeing, checking on construction crews on flips. So it was really interesting and really appreciative for that opportunity, which I think if there's anything you want to learn, go find someone that's doing it and go ask, how can you add value to what they're doing? And most people will be very appreciative, and in turn be able to, will share their knowledge. They're happy to, whatever it is, real estate investing, some other business, they'll be happy to share because they're usually very passionate about it. In that time, I met a guy that was in college. Both of us didn't have any money, but we got together and did our first flip during my first year of medical school, and bought a house for $13,000, and made a lot of mistakes in the process, but ultimately didn't lose our shirt altogether, and was able to sell it. But then after that, I kind of went on this silent period in real estate because of medical school, residency, being, fellowship, business school, attending life, didn't really have any resources. So only in the last 6 years or so, I think 5 or 6 years, have I been able to get back into it more actively. So
sounds like you were given someone gave you I guess a kindling or a small spark in college when you read Robert Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which I think is a must read for everybody. It's also available. I think you can listen to it on YouTube, or you can buy the book. I have the book myself. That is obviously one way to make money. And a lot of people say you should diversify, not just have all the money in real estate. And like you, I have 401k. I've set up a defined benefit pension plan, which is a dying breed of how to help people save money in my practice, and also how myself save money in my practice. And I agree with you. No one cares about your money or your practice as much as you do. I got in trouble for saying that recently in a post. But it's true. You started the practice, you built everything up, or you contributed to the practice. You are very passionate about what you do. It is. I think we should really have emphasized more on education, on financial things in residency, in college, in high school. I'm very, very happy that my kids at least have some life skills that they taught in high school about balancing checkbooks, about microeconomics and macroeconomics and things like that. I never got any of that. So I'm hoping that this will continue. And I hope everyone who's listening will at least pick up a book or two about finances. I'll put the links of the books that Ian and I talk about in the comment section, so that you can look at it and you can read on your own. But at this time, I would like to invite everyone to potentially call with any questions that you may have regarding what we're talking about. Dr. Borhan mentioned in the comments regarding how private equity increases the EBITDA. It's not just from our services and the peripheral services such as pathology and things like that. So I think that's true. It's more than just our services. Ann Shar said the initial buyout money could be put to work on day one with the same real estate investments instead of being capitalized over 5-year amortization via your own haircut. Probably would result in higher returns given time value of the investment deployed. That's also a very good point.
That is. And I'll tell you that my education got a springboard at another level because of a friend of mine, this urologist that was part of a private equity transaction. And he called me one day and said, "Hey, I'm getting this check and I'm looking to do real estate. I've done all this. I really spent a lot of time investing in his education. And I was doing the real estate to a certain degree, but didn't have as much education to how to maximize the return of the value." And so he really, I'd never really listened to podcasts before, and turned me on to a bunch of, books and resources and stuff. And then it's been able to help us grow significantly from a tax standpoint, learning about something to put out there, real estate professional status, and which is an ability to turn what are by default passive losses from depreciation and everything from rental properties into active losses. The power of that is that can mitigate your tax liability from your W-2 or physician income, and so kudos to my wife. That's helps me a lot with that, because it's really hard to do as a real estate professional status as a physician, but if your spouse filing jointly does it, then that can really help improve your returns greatly. So So kudos to her because she helps do a lot with that.
So she's a real estate agent?
No, she's not. She helps manage our properties. So you don't have to be a real estate agent. You just have to be active participation. So I'm mostly in the affordable housing space, mobile home parks, some RV parks, small apartments, single family rentals. And so we self-manage. Again, it's not passive. So it's pretty active. But that's what you have to do to qualify for this. But when you take that into the opportunity for bonus depreciation, which was 100% up until the end of last year, and it's now 80% this year, what that means is that what used to be straight line depreciation, you can do what's called cost segregation analysis. I don't want to get too deep in this, but you can push a lot of that depreciation of a property that you've acquired, leveraged. And then if it's active, it can go, if you qualify for a real estate professional status, you can just take those huge chunks of depreciation against your otherwise other taxable income.
Yeah, this is the type of information that is not readily available. The REPS, real estate professional status, that gives you a lot of tax advantages. And that's something that not a lot of people realize. And I completely agree with you that most, if not all, of this passive stuff, passive income stuff, it's not passive. You have to at least manage it somehow, especially if you're planning to manage your real estate. If you have a portfolio of whatever it is, properties. I know we outsource that. My wife and I, we outsource that to a management company. Even with the management company, you still have to be involved. It is still, they're asking you for permission to do X, Y, or Z. You still have to be somewhat involved. Otherwise, again, as you said, no one cares about your money as much as you do. And let's see. And cost segregation. And I think Dr. Rubin was recently talking about leasing a space for 10 years or something like that. And someone mentioned buying your own space. And one of the things that you can do after you purchase your property for business, for your practice, is you can use cost segregation to increase your deductions. So these are some of the things that are fairly, I mean, I guess if you talk to people like Ian and myself, it's very common knowledge for us. But for most people, they don't realize the tax advantages of being able to do some of these. I'm going to read a question from Grant. Yeah, he said, Ian, I'm considering going back for an executive MBA and trying to figure out if that makes sense for me to help grow my practice and potentially branch out into other entrepreneurial areas like startups, VC consulting, real estate. Could you comment on if/how that has added value for you versus on-the-job learning? Great question.
So I'm a little mixed on it. It depends. My executive MBA program was actually more expensive than my medical school. That's actually how I got into locums.
Wow.
Doing locums work was to help, because I was at a low paid faculty position, and I did locums on the side to help pay for this business program, which was great. I went to a non-healthcare program because I wanted to have more diversity of the people I was working with, because there's a lot of team-based projects. So those kind of interactions with other folks, very valuable exposure to other businesses and industries. So that's very valuable. It really depends on what you're trying to get out of it. If you're trying to get to something that's going to help you run your practice better, it's not going to be useful. Because John would probably, I don't know if you'd agree with me on this, is that running a medical practice is fairly unique. I mean, there's some basic business tenets you could pick up in just reading a couple books as far as how to run a business. But you're not going to get anything really great out of at least in my exposure in the business program to teach you on how to run your business in that practice better. I do think that the physicians a lot of times get pigeonholed in being within healthcare and hospitals. Oh, you don't know anything. You're just a urologist. You just put the catheters in, bust up the stones. Don't have an opinion because you don't understand business. I think that getting an MBA can stamp your CV so that you can be able to do other things and other leadership opportunities. So I think it's useful from that perspective. It really just comes down to what the cost is and that return on the cost that you're looking to look. So can you hear that music? I'm sorry, my TV just popped in. Let me go pause that real quick. So.
Yeah, sounds good. And I will go ahead and chat here. And I completely agree with Ian. Your value of getting the executive MBA may be variable depending on what it is that you want to do. Now, Grant, you specifically mentioned entrepreneurial areas like startups and VC and also consulting. You can do consulting on your own even without going through the executive MBA. You can do medical consulting. You can do medical legal consulting. Real estate, you can read certain books. You can take a seminar. You can listen to podcasts. And there are physicians who have gone through this process who actually have put together courses on how you achieve that real estate professional, REPS, it's called REPS, real estate professional status. So you can take the depreciation and take the tax deduction. Entrepreneurial areas like startups and VC. I have a little bit of experience in that. I sat on the investment committee of a small venture capital investment fund, not private equity, but it's more of a startup investment fund, if you will. It's like Shark Tank, except it's not. We're nicer than the people on Shark Tank. We're like whales. So I have sat on investment committees in our fund. You can't get experience that way if you don't want to directly invest in a company as a startup, which is very risky. You can put your money in a fund, like an index fund in the stock market. You can put your money in a fund that they will deploy on your behalf to invest in startups and venture capital. Again, very risky. And real estate, we talked about. So I hope that covers your question, Grant. And Shea Marie, Dr. Sai says, storage shed units or buildings are not high maintenance, but pretty passive income. So what do you think about that?
No, I agree. I'm actually working on a deal right now to put an RV park under contract with additional land, hopefully to build out some storage. I actually have a couple properties that I'm looking to build out some storage because it's amazing how much people pay to store stuff they never use. And it's an American phenomenon. I mean, I think just in the RV space, you buy an RV and you may take it on a trip once or twice a year. And then when it's not being used, you pay, I don't know, $300 or $400 in some places for it just to sit under a carport kind of thing, even if that. So I think they're good business models, and it's very competitive. A lot of venture, PE funds or venture capital funds that are, so you've seen the cap rate contraction within that just because it's so good.
Yeah, and the cap rate, we deal with single family homes, and the cap rate I was looking for was around 6 or 7%, but it's much higher now because we bought at the right time, right after, around 2010, shortly after 2010, we're picking up a bunch of properties, and it's certainly worked out well. But there's no one way or right way or wrong way. There are just many different ways. But I think the more you are exposed, the listening and watching audience, the more you are exposed to the different ways, at least you are aware instead of missing out. And that knowledge gap is what I'm so frustrated about. How do we get this information out to people? So Todd said, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, and there's no excuse these days. Back when I got that book, Rich Dad Poor Dad, 20, something years ago, like that was it. I mean, there was no Facebook, there was no YouTube, there were no of these courses and so forth. So shout out to my friend Stephen Kappa in Cincinnati, for turning me on to some of these, and I'll give you this information, these links to these courses and these podcasts and stuff that has just been able to, the returns of that, just talking to people and saying, hey, what are you reading? What are you listening to? That's where you get that exposure. It's just offhand conversation. So like our conversation today and our ability to share what I'm listening to, what you're listening to, what you're reading is high return for folks, I feel like.
Yeah. And that's why I just love this platform, the Thriving Urology Practice Facebook group. It's free. It's freaking free. You can ask any questions. You can ask questions anonymously. But anyway, I digress. Todd said, no reason for MBA for entrepreneurial stuff. It's better if you're looking for a C-suite position at a hospital, but not necessary. It's a necessity for finance roles, which most of us do not want. So good point.
I'd agree with that. The other thing is that people go to business school to improve their economic, potential. you're as a urologist, your economic potential is way more than in most, like 99% of MBAs out there.
Yeah. And Tom says, with the trend out of private practice medicine, I am concerned about practices owning real estate, their buildings, rehab centers, imaging centers, as in the past, because if the practice is, quote, bought out by a large group or hospital, I find most of the large corporate entities have real estate sections and want the practitioners to be in the corporate-owned properties. Is that something that you have noticed?
I have. I mean, it's a different type of private equity play for senior partners. You buy up your property and you want to improve the value. So one exit strategy is you over time you increase the rent that the practice is paying. It's one thing if it's your own practice and it's all just you, but if you're the young urologist coming into a practice, you may be paying a more than market rent potentially. I don't know, but I see that there's no incentive. So some senior partners may own that building and then they're going to sell it out to some other, real estate investment trust or something. I've seen that happen in practices, even in our local, not just urology, but larger practices in general. And so you're going to be paying a high rent. They're going to put this really long lease on it to improve the value of that sell and that exit, but you don't have the ability to move. And so I think for me, the way I do my practice is I'm very small, very lean, very nimble. Don't have anything I can't change within 90 days. So that's in an effort to keep overhead low. But if you're not part of that play, and I also think is that owning real estate for your practice, yes, it can be beneficial, but if that's your only real estate play, you're not diversifying it at all, because, that tenant base is based on you getting up in the morning and going to work, not, my tenants that are, working at a restaurant or the gas station, what have you. That diversity, I think, is important to take in consideration.
Excellent. Todd also said, I have an MBA. You probably don't need one because some companies find it useful. Do one that is cheap and part-time that doesn't impact on your practice. He also said, hashtag VTSAX. He's referencing an index fund on the Vanguard platform. He says hashtag VTSAX and chill. And I actually do that myself. I dollar cost average every single month into VTSAX. We're doctors. Stock market is easiest to invest in. Can buy REITs, real estate investment trusts, REITs, if you want to dabble in real estate. So that's another way that you want to dabble in real estate. You can do that too. And said, agree with the value proposition of the real estate in your last slide. However, it should not be instead of, okay? And Todd said, real estate doesn't make that much sense for most urologists. Take the time you put into real estate and do some clinical time. You'll make more, and then put that in VTSAX and don't think twice. It will likely outperform real estate in the long run. And like you said, Ian, it's to diversify. You don't want to put everything in VTSAX. You don't want to put everything in real estate. You don't want to put everything in commercial real estate or REITs or anything like that. You want to. That's why they say diversify. If one class of investment goes down, you have the other one to fall back on.
No, I would agree. I mean, yeah.
Let's see. Todd made some recommendations in the comments regarding the books. And also one of the books he mentioned was The White Coat Investor, which I also read. It's a very easy. These books are just covering the very basics of what every American needs to understand. Even for the non-physicians, The White Coat Investor, I think, is helpful. If you, Todd said, if you read two books, would read White Coat Investor, basic knowledge all docs should have. I agree. And Kamal said, timing in the market rather than. Okay, no, I think what he meant to say was time in the market rather than trying to time. Spending the amount of time that you have in the market is much better and safer than trying to time the market.
I'd agree. No matter what asset class, whether it's the stock market, whether it's the real estate market, just get in.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, and stay in and keep to your point, dollar cost averaging. If equities is where you want to be, even though interest rates are higher, to put it in perspective, I closed a large RV park December 21 at 3%. The one I closed in December 2022 was at 5.9%. And when I'm putting under in contract now, I'm looking 7.5 to 8%. Now, you just because interest rates are going up, am I not looking? No. I'm just recreating. I'm creating better, I have a better place to be more creative in the deals that I'm putting together. I mean, I like to put together, a lot of owner finance stuff and try to get in for little to no money kind of things. And so it's a little bit different, a little more leverage than real estate's the only place you can use leverage, aside from private equity kind of things like that when you're buying into business, to actually you're buying revenue and cash flow with somebody else's money.
Yeah, and that's the basic concept of the Rich Dad, Poor Dad book by Robert Kiyosaki. Kamal said, let's see, he already said that. Let's see, agree with you, John, regarding compound interest, very powerful, not well understood or applied. Yep, that's why we're talking about it. Todd said, University of Massachusetts Amherst gears its MBA for working physicians, completely online, no time loss, only $28,000 for the whole thing, and you can make it tax deductible. Yeah, pretty much anything that you spend money on to possibly improve your business or your practice is tax deductible. The government will make tax codes, will write tax codes to influence you in doing things that they want you to do. And most of the tax code is written to benefit businesses. I don't know if all of you know that, but
yeah, the W-2 space. The W-2 is the worst place to be, and I mean, from a tax standpoint. And I don't have to agree with everything in the tax code. You don't have to agree with everything in the tax code. You just got to know the tax code, and to your point, realize that it's a lever. If you had like there's a great book, the Fair Tax book, or just like a simple flat rate. You would empty K Street of lobbyists, because most of them are just there to lobby this or that on the tax code and incentives. And that's why real estate tends to be so much. If you really learn it, the power of understanding the tax code, because you're able to mitigate that tax liability, and then you throw more capital towards interest, or return, interest growing sort of ways to make, the return on it. There's the power, and just go into setting of time. But yeah, as I've heard other people say, that the government realized they're not good at building housing in the United States. So what we're going to do, we're going to create a tax code that incentivizes somebody else to go do the work that we're bad at and do that way. So,
yep, I totally agree. All right, let's see. What else do you have on your slide? Bank will be very happy. Okay, buy $1 million of cash flowing property each year at 10% cash on cash return. Tax benefits, revenue increases every year, much larger buyer pool than private equity. Can exit or liquidate whenever. So it is more liquid. Okay. And generation wealth, diversified, reduced risk in 5 years, $100,000 revenue per year, and someone else paying for the $5 million in real estate. You want to expound on that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, if I want to go buy 100 shares of Coca-Cola, I got to have whatever it's, 100 times whatever it's selling for that day to buy, versus if I want that 100 shares of the corollary within real estate, for instance, is that, I just get 20% and, leverage the rest. And then, and over time, just as you pay down your mortgage for your house, somebody else is a tenant, whether it's commercial or residential sort of property, is paying and buying that equity for me. And in the interim, if the deal is structured correctly, is putting tax-free money in my pocket every month. And then, so the generational wealth component is that the problem with putting all your eggs in the medicine or urology basket, your MSO or whatever, is that someday you're going to retire or have to leave medicine one way or the other. And you're going to have a liquidation event, and the growth potential of that capital is in that sort of asset class is going to go away. And real estate is a way for you to pass on, you get an estate attorney, different ways to do that. And it's also a great vehicle for teaching generational, financial knowledge as well, even though my kids hate listening to real estate podcasts in the car, but it's usually on in the background. But but sometimes they like it, and they're learning. And I'm actively making, they have little jobs they do. So they roll quarters from the laundry at a couple of our properties. So, and they get a cut of the quarter of the laundry revenue, but they have to roll the quarters and empty the machines, do little things like that. So hopefully, when they're older, they'll appreciate it. Remains to be seen.
Yeah.
So
no, I think I totally believe in that knowledge transfer by diffusion. I totally believe it, but I try to dole it out in small doses so they are not completely turned off by it. And the fact that they can take vacations, that they can, we don't have to worry about whether or not I can buy something. Like when I was growing up, I try to share with them my story of how I grew up versus how they're living right now. And they appreciate that. I think teaching them the work ethic of rolling the quarters and then getting a payout. And also, very importantly, I've been teaching them about taxes. They make they earn gross income $10. They don't get $10 to spend. So we've been teaching them that too.
That's awesome. My wife even has the mommy tax when it comes to ice cream. It's good. We're going to come and take with the spoon, the mommy tax. So it started really young for them. So they got to understand the taxes for sure.
And also something else in the generational wealth is that if you pass on property, you're getting another advantage, tax advantage, in that the appreciated value of the property is now the new basis. Going on for your kids. So if I were to pass, the appreciated value of all the properties that we have gets passed on to the kids without having to pay that difference in the appreciation. So that's another way. That's another way to pass generational wealth.
No, agreed.
Dr. Sai says diversifying is a must. Each of my children, when of age, gets a job at my clinic and have each started their own half traditional savings account, half into the stock market. If paid under a certain amount per year, that income is not tax deductible. Yeah, for the kids. I totally agree. You can also use the kids as models for advertising and marketing if you wish to do so. More importantly, they are able to watch their money grow in different ways and understanding risk, because we all talk about, oh yeah, this is making whatever cap rate and return on investment, especially in the stock market. I'm down in my Vanguard account 3% of all the money that I put in. Granted, I jumped on Vanguard much later than I should have. So I just started a couple of years ago. I'm down 3%. So the money that you put in there is not without risk. And you have to understand that it takes time. You put the money in, you don't look at it. You don't look at it every single day. You don't look at it every single month. Once in a while, as you're putting money in, or if you get a transactional reminder, hey, you had this transaction detail from your dollar cost averaging that you're doing, meaning you are putting money in automatically without you having to lift a finger. So that's what I do with a chunk of my money every single month. We put it in various different buckets in the Vanguard space. So you can pick whatever you want, but doing that automatically, it's called dollar cost averaging. Whether or not, whatever the pundits are saying at MSNBC or CNBC, Fox News, the market going up and down, market crashing, whatever, just continue to invest over the long run. If you look at it over the long run, the curve goes up.
Yeah.
And here's the ultimate risk, right? I can say that the curve goes up over time, over decades. What if there's a huge crash and everything goes down? And if that were to ever happen, that means there's a huge attack on the financial infrastructure of the United States. At that time, I couldn't care less about the greenback. I'm going to be stocking up on ammo, ways to start fire. And I'm going to use that money to start fires. Because at that time, if you really have that type of a catastrophic crash, then something bad has really happened in not just the US, but the world.
Yeah, and there's another book, historical economics, called When Money Dies. And it's if you don't know the story of post-Weimar Germany after World War I, and running the printing press, to solve your debt obligations. It's actually apropos for the time we live in right now, if you look at the government debt and how we print money to try to solve issues and give money away. We could talk about that for hours, or I could, and the problems that come with that. So it should change you should be mindful of that kind of stuff and what's going on at a higher level, economic level. And to your point, make sure you have access to water and all that kind of stuff. I'm not off the grid kind of building it, but those are things I think about, and everybody should, because the financial markets, a really good cyber attack or something like that could, wipe out, a lot of stuff. What happens to the run on the banks? What are all this, so.
Yeah. What happened to Silicon Valley? Sure. Yeah. What happened to Silicon Valley Bank recently?
Exactly.
When there's a run on the money there. And Grant also mentioned C-suite as some healthcare entities seems like the place to be. Doctors have been put at the kids' table, scrambling to make hundreds of thousands when executives, especially when IPO is involved, may be looking at making 10 or 100x that. But again, you're not taking into account the risk. If you're starting something and you have an IPO, a lot of people took a lot of risk to get to that point, get to that IPO stage, initial public offering stage. So it's not, they're always, you can't just say, yeah, we're going to put the money there and this is a guaranteed return. Nothing is guaranteed. So you have to take into account risk. But
yeah, the biggest risk comes the biggest gain. The biggest gains come from the biggest risks, for sure.
You take
and
a lot.
If you're not willing to tolerate risk, then don't expect anything big.
And that's why I say that what we talk about is not for everybody. You have to find what is comfortable for you. As far as leveraging debt to buy real estate, etc., I leveraged no debt when I made my acquisitions. Some people can't do that, but you can also leverage debt to purchase real estate. That'll make you equity, and then you leverage that equity to get more debt to leverage to buy more properties. So I think that's the Kiyosaki way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'd agree.
I think we beat this one to death. And I think
that's a great discussion.
Yeah, I think this is probably one of the most impactful discussions that I've had regarding finances, investments, and things like that for a long time. But I hope people find value in being able to read some of the comments, and I'll have to listen back to this interview and then write down all the books that we mentioned so that everyone can at least start somewhere. And that's my recommendation.
Yeah, I'll be sure to send a list of things that I've either referenced or things I've forgotten to reference that I think would be useful for folks to check out. And to what I do, I couldn't do it all or any of it without the help of my wife. So shout out to Megan, who's actually a member of this group, because she helped. She no longer works in my practice, but when we started it up, she got conscripted day one when we decided to start the practice. So she's been a huge help in making this a reality in my practice and in the real estate these days. So
this is something that when I was giving a presentation at one of the AUA meetings, at the young urologist meeting, somebody asked me, John, how did you get to where you are when it comes to finances? And I tell this group of urologists that two advice that I have for you as urologists. Number one, don't buy stupid shit. And number two, marry the right woman. So I completely agree with you in that whom you marry makes a big difference in your overall success, your happiness in life.
No, I agree. And if you want to follow her mobile home park shenanigans, you can follow her at Mailbox Money Mom on Instagram, where she posts some funny pictures to document what real estate rep status really looks like, the non-passive version. Like it's really active. So there's some funny stuff. So.
Okay, we'll definitely have to put that in the video description. So Dr. Sai says, thank you. Great talk. Awesome. I appreciate everyone hanging on and watching. There's quite a few of you watching live at this time, man. For those of you who are watching on the replay, feel free to leave any comments below. Ian, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate this. This has been one of the most I think to me, exciting discussions regarding private equity and finance.
I appreciate the opportunity. I thank you for all you do for our community urologists and helping everybody grow and do what we do better each and every day. So thanks for all of your hard work. It's a huge benefit for all of us.
That's awesome. That's my little way to pay it forward, because urology has really benefited me. It's literally changed my life and changed the trajectory of my family. So I'm really appreciative, and this is my small way to pay it forward.
Well, great. Thanks.
All right. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, agreements, or disagreements, please feel free to leave it in the comments below. Thank you so much for the privilege of your time. Please take care of yourself and take care of each other. Bye-bye.